Well, there was a guy that was on an opal field in New South Wales, and he was concerned about. He actually believed the Bible, and so when the geologists would come around and talk to him, and they'd talk about the opals, they'd always talk about hundreds of millions of years, and it used to really annoy him because he thought, I know that they are not that old because what the Bible says, and so he set about as a task, as his purpose in life was to show that you can form opals quickly. And he thought, if I can only sort of think about what the conditions were like during Noah's flood and what different things were going on at that time, I'm sure that I could form opals quickly. And he spent many, many years experimenting. He'd get the sediment, basically the silica sand from the opal field there. He'd use different solutions. He'd put different liquids in on top of. He'd start with a jam jar and he'd put liquids in there. And after lots and lots of failures, he eventually came across a solution to it and was able to form opals. In the 1970s, he was able to form these opals in jam jars, actually Vegemite jars, they used to call them at that time. So what he did, he got that sediment, he put it in the jar, and he had a solution which contains some sort of an organic substance in it as well, connected with silica. So this particular solution, it allowed the silica sand to absorb the water, to become hydrated. And so when he put it in, it wasn't very long before the opal colouring would just start appearing in the sand, and it would be replaced with opal. And sometimes it was as little as, say, 15 minutes, the opal colouring would start to form. But certainly within a few days, say 6 days, 10 days, there was considerable opal colouring would appear in the sand. And it had a band about it, sort of a band of opal colouring, and it was replicated very similar to the way you find opal in the field. And interestingly, it demonstrated that the opal doesn't form in cracks. It actually replaces the sand that's there, replaces the silica that's there, and so it grows within the silica sand itself.
I never would have thought you'd be able to make opal in a matter of weeks. Is it the actual opal, or is it just sort of coloured solution? What's appearing at that time?
Well, it looks just like opal when you look at it in the glass jar. It looks like opal, and this guy's name was Len Cram, and when Len had the opal analysed under an electron microscope, you could see the silica spheres under the electron microscope, just exactly the same as in a real, an opal that forms naturally. And when the opal forms in that particular way, it's a little bit soft like a gel, right, to start with. And so you wouldn't be able to use it for jewellery immediately, but with time it goes hard. The opal actually expels the water from within its structure, and it becomes hard like the natural opal that you find in the field.
Okay. Well, that seems pretty cool. So you've got a sort of an experiment environment, in a shed, and he's got the right chemicals and the right sand. Would you expect opals to be able to be formed this quickly in nature without, having a lab and a shed?
Well, the way they talk about them being formed in nature is that it's the rainfall which occurs. It sort of goes down through the little cracks and things in the surface until it gets right down deep, and it absorbs silica as it goes, dissolves things, and then eventually precipitates these opals over a long, long period of time. So that's the story that goes on. There's actual evidence that the opal doesn't form slowly like that in nature. Now, there was at Lightning Ridge, one of the opal fields in New South Wales, they had the first big seminar on opal formation at Lightning Ridge, and one of the professors who was there, he gave a lecture and demonstrated that he found evidence of bacteria in opal, which was found at Lightning Ridge. And so that was interesting because it indicated that there were these living organisms in this particular opal formation, in this opal, this precious stone. And so that indicates that the conditions were such that they formed very quickly, because if they hadn't have formed quickly, you wouldn't have been able to have these bacteria living there. And they were the sort of bacteria that they needed oxygen. They were aerobic bacteria. They needed oxygen to survive. And so this professor said that it was clear that the opal formed quite quickly, very soon after the sediment was actually deposited. So there was a very clear evidence that the opals formed quickly actually in the field, not just in a chemical in a jar, but in the field. That's a very clear evidence that's there.
Sounds pretty convincing. Have you got any more evidence?
Well, this professor's daughter actually carried on, and she was actually able to identify the types of bacteria, and she was able to identify that there was nutrients connected with the sediments, and so these nutrients were able to provide, keep these bacteria alive, and also it provided evidence that at the time where the sediment was being deposited, that there was a nutrient-rich environment. It was oxygen-rich and nutrient-rich, and they could actually get some indication of the temperatures which were involved. And the temperatures were warmer than the sort of normal oceans, sort of thing. Yeah. And so this indicated that under these conditions where the opals formed, that it fits with the global flood of Noah. So that's the way I sort of look at it, is that during Noah's flood, it's an event which lasted a year, and the waters were coming up in the first 5 months of the flood. That it's documented there in the Bible. And so as the waters were reaching their peak, that's when these opal sediments, where the opal fields are in Australia, it's called the Great Artesian Basin. All those sediments were deposited as the waters were reaching their peak during Noah's flood after the first 5 months. And so at that time, there would have been lots of nutrients in the water because of the vegetation that died and the other animals, the creatures that died during the flood. And so that is consistent with that story. The story of Noah's flood describes that quite well. So I think that's a good evidence that it provides for that.
So all this information you've been telling us about opals is actually in an article you wrote in Creation Magazine. Can you tell us a bit more about Creation Magazine?
Creation Magazine has lots of amazing articles like this every 3 months when it comes out. The good thing about the magazine is it's easy to read, and it's great to get into the home, into the family. And I love it. My kids loved it. And as a matter of fact, they excelled at science because of what they learned in Creation Magazine. It's like learning without any pain, and that's great.
You can get Creation Magazine today. Have a look in the description below. There's a link there. Click on that, and we'll even throw in a bonus gift if you subscribe. Thanks, Tas.
It's good to be here, Michael.